It was a bright Saturday morning, and the shopping district was alive with people moving in every direction. Families were strolling along the sidewalks, friends laughed as they carried shopping bags, and street vendors called out to attract customers. Among the crowd, a black woman in her early 40s walked calmly, dressed in a neat blouse and slacks, carrying a small purse. She moved with a quiet confidence, her steps measured and her head held high. But she didn't draw attention to herself. To her, this was a normal day off, a chance to shop for a few essentials and enjoy a little time outside the office. She entered a well-known department store. The smell of polished wood and new clothes filled the air. She paused near the racks of jackets, scanning the selections carefully. Her fingers brushed over the fabric as she examined the quality. And she picked up a few items to inspect them more closely. To her, it was just a casual shopping trip, nothing unusual. She moved slowly, taking care to place each item back where it belonged if she decided not to buy it. But someone else saw it differently. A store security guard stationed near the entrance had been watching her since she arrived. He noticed her picking up a jacket, examining it, and then moving it slightly aside. In his eyes, it seemed suspicious, though there was nothing overtly wrong. Maybe it was the way she looked around the store, or perhaps the fact that she was alone. Whatever it was, he felt uneasy and decided to call for backup. Within minutes, 2 uniformed police officers arrived. They approached her calmly at first, asking if she could step aside to answer a few questions. She complied immediately, her hands visible and her demeanor polite. "Good morning, officers," she said with a calm voice. "How can I help you?" The officers explained that the store suspected her of shoplifting. She listened carefully, her expression unchanged even though she could feel a wave of disbelief and frustration rising inside her. Shoplifting? That was absurd. She had done nothing wrong. She tried to explain. "I have been looking at jackets. I haven't taken anything out of the store without paying." One of the officers frowned and repeated that they had to take her in for questioning. The woman remained composed. She had dealt with stressful situations before, though never quite like this. She knew that losing her temper could make things worse. She allowed them to handcuff her, though the metal felt heavy against her wrists. She maintained her calm, speaking respectfully but firmly, explaining that she wanted to resolve the situation quickly and professionally. Passers-by began to notice the scene. A few stopped to watch as the officers guided her toward their patrol car. Some whispered to each other, wondering what could have happened. A couple of people started recording with their phones, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. She noticed the eyes of strangers on her, but she didn't let it shake her. She understood the importance of keeping her composure, both for herself and for the situation. Inside the patrol car, the tension increased. The officers began asking more questions, their tone sharper now, tinged with suspicion. She answered every question calmly, explaining clearly that she had not committed any crime. She repeated details about her visit, the items she had looked at, and her intention to pay if she found anything she liked. Yet their skepticism did not waver. She could sense that they were convinced she had done something wrong, even without proof. As the car idled, the woman observed the procedural errors the officers were making. She noticed small but significant mistakes, things that she had seen countless times during her career in law enforcement. She gently mentioned them, carefully choosing her words to avoid provoking defensiveness. But the officers brushed off her advice, apparently more interested in asserting control than in following proper protocol. She thought about how ironic the situation was. Here she was, a veteran in law enforcement, someone who had spent years enforcing the law and mentoring young officers, now being treated as a suspect by officers who were unaware of her experience or authority. The unfairness of it stung, but she refused to let it cloud her judgment. She reminded herself that remaining calm was more powerful than reacting with anger. Meanwhile, the store manager arrived at the scene. He looked nervous as he approached the patrol car, wringing his hands slightly. He explained that the security guard had seen her act suspiciously, but when the woman recounted her actions, it became clear that nothing had been stolen or hidden. He looked at the woman apologetically, but the officers insisted on following through with their detainment until the situation could be clarified. Outside the car, the crowd of onlookers had grown. People whispered, some shaking their heads in disbelief. They didn't know the whole story, only what they could see. A well-dressed black woman in handcuffs speaking calmly to 2 police officers. Some sympathized silently, Others seemed curious and a few appeared judgmental. She felt their eyes but chose to focus on what she could control: her words, her tone, and her actions. She thought about how quickly assumptions could spiral out of control. The officers had seen her picking up clothes and immediately jumped to conclusions, ignoring the possibility that she was simply shopping. She reflected on how such misunderstandings often happened, especially to people who looked like her. This thought saddened her, but she didn't dwell on it. Instead, she focused on staying composed and professional. As minutes passed, the tension in the car remained high. The officers were tense, their eyes darting back and forth between her and their radios. She answered every question with patience, never raising her voice. Her calmness seemed to confuse them, as if they expected fear, anger, or resistance. Instead, they were met with a steady, collected presence, a reminder that assumptions can be misleading and that appearances do not always tell the full story. She also thought about the power of perception. The store security guard had perceived her as a threat, and the officers had reinforced that perception. She realized how important it was to challenge assumptions carefully and wisely, especially in situations charged with authority, fear, and misunderstanding. She didn't want to escalate, but she wanted to be heard, to be understood, and to have the truth recognized. Despite the growing frustration, she refused to panic. She knew that revealing who she was could help clarify the situation, but she also weighed the potential consequences. She wanted to handle this in a way that would educate rather than humiliate, that would resolve the misunderstanding without creating unnecessary conflict. She remained silent for now, listening carefully, watching the body language of the officers and considering her next steps. The scene outside the car continued to unfold. A few bystanders began speaking to the store manager, asking what had happened. Some voiced concern about the treatment of the woman. Others simply watched, curious about the unfolding situation. In her mind, she acknowledged that this was exactly the kind of moment where public perception mattered, and where restraint and professionalism could make a lasting impression. Inside the car, the woman finally made a quiet, deliberate decision. She would reveal her identity, but she would do it in a calm and controlled manner. She wanted to avoid confrontation and instead hoped to turn the misunderstanding into an opportunity for awareness and learning. She straightened her posture, took a deep breath, and prepared to speak, knowing that the next few moments could change everything. For now, though, she stayed silent, observing, reflecting, and maintaining her calm presence. Every movement, every glance, every word she spoke had to be measured. She thought about the countless times she had trained officers, handled delicate situations, and mediated conflicts. She drew on that experience now, remembering that control and patience often achieved more than force or anger ever could. The minutes ticked by slowly, but she felt in control. Despite the handcuffs, the misunderstanding, and the tension, she refused to let the situation define her. She was more than the assumptions others had made. She was a professional, a leader, and a human being deserving of respect. She reminded herself that she could influence the outcome through calm reasoning, careful words, and composed action. As the car continued to wait, with officers occasionally speaking into their radios, she prepared herself mentally for what was coming next. She knew that the revelation of her identity could shift the balance, but she also knew it required grace, tact, and patience. She remained focused, her mind clear, her voice steady, and her presence commanding even in the midst of misunderstanding. And so, the day that began as a simple shopping trip had turned into a test of patience, professionalism, and composure. The woman remained calm, quietly determined, and ready to navigate the unexpected turn her ordinary day had taken. She knew that the next steps would be crucial, not only for herself but for those witnessing the incident, for the officers involved, and for the broader lessons about assumption, judgment, and respect that this encounter would inevitably bring. The story of that morning was just beginning, and she was ready to face it with the dignity, calm, and intelligence that had defined her life and career. Even in the midst of handcuffs, misunderstanding, and growing public attention, she remained composed, a quiet force of authority and grace. The patrol car moved slowly through the busy streets, its siren silent but the presence of the officers clearly visible to the people passing by. Inside, the woman remained calm, sitting upright with her hands cuffed gently in front of her. She kept her eyes steady, observing everything around her: the bustling city outside the window, the way the officers talked to each other, the subtle tension in their movements. She noticed the slight unease in their posture, the way they glanced at her occasionally as if she might suddenly act unpredictably. She understood what they were feeling because she had been in their shoes countless times. Yet the irony of the situation was almost unbearable. One of the officers finally spoke, his voice cautious. "We need to ask you some more questions," he said. He sounded formal, almost rehearsed, as if he had repeated this line dozens of times in similar situations. The woman nodded politely, replying, "I understand. I'll answer any questions you have as long as it's done properly." The officer raised an eyebrow at her words, clearly noticing her calm tone and deliberate phrasing. There was something in the way she spoke that didn't match the image they had of a nervous suspect. She answered every question with precision, explaining where she had been in the store, what she had touched, and what she had intended to buy. She remained honest and clear, offering details without showing any sign of frustration, even though inside, her patience was being tested. The other officer glanced at his partner, exchanging a brief silent conversation through looks. He seemed annoyed that she remained composed. "Why is she acting like this?" he muttered under his breath. He expected anxiety, fear, maybe a defensive attitude, but instead she was calm, collected, and completely in control. It unsettled them. She noticed small procedural errors they were making. The questions they asked were slightly out of order, and some of the details they recorded were inconsistent. She could see how the officers' assumptions had clouded their judgment. She mentioned one of the errors gently, saying, "I think there might be a misunderstanding about the timeline. I can clarify if you'd like." The officer dismissed her immediately, as if he didn't want to hear her explanation. She didn't push further. Pushing would only create resistance and tension. She thought about how easy it was for people to make mistakes when fear or assumptions were involved. The officers had seen a black woman in a store alone and calm and immediately jumped to conclusions. It was a simple misunderstanding that had quickly escalated. She reminded herself not to take it personally even though it stung. She focused on what she could control, her words, her actions, and her attitude. The patrol car slowed to a stop near the police station. The officers explained that she would need to come in for further questioning. She nodded politely, understanding the process but knowing that the accusation was baseless. As they opened the doors, she stepped out carefully, making sure her movements were slow and non-threatening. She didn't resist, she didn't argue, and she maintained a composed demeanor. Every step was measured, every word deliberate. Once inside the station, she was guided to a small room with plain walls and a single table. She sat down, keeping her posture straight, her hands folded neatly in front of her. The room felt sterile and tense, filled with the subtle hum of fluorescent lights and distant voices from other parts of the station. She could feel the weight of the situation, but she didn't let it show. She had been trained to stay calm under pressure, and this was no different. The officers continued their questioning, their voices firm but professional. They asked her to recount the events in the store again, to explain her actions and to provide identification. She handed over her driver's license without hesitation, answering each question with clarity and honesty. She could see the confusion in their eyes when they realized she was not an ordinary shopper. There was a flicker of doubt, a moment when their certainty wavered. The woman took a deep breath and decided to speak carefully. She began to explain her background, her career in law enforcement, and her position as a police commander. She described her years of service, her training, and her dedication to upholding the law. Her voice remained calm and measured, but there was an unmistakable authority in her tone. The officers listened, some with disbelief, some with curiosity. They had expected resistance, not a professional colleague with experience beyond their own. For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. She continued, explaining that she had never intended to break any rules, that she was merely shopping for personal items, and that the misunderstanding could have been avoided with proper communication and observation. Her words were precise but gentle, aiming to correct the situation without escalating it further. The officers exchanged glances again, clearly uncertain how to proceed. One of them muttered almost to himself, "I didn't know. I had no idea." The woman nodded slightly, acknowledging the tension in the room. She didn't want to humiliate them, only to clarify the truth and ensure that the misunderstanding was resolved. She understood how easy it was to make assumptions, especially in situations that seemed suspicious at first glance. Meanwhile, outside the room, the store manager spoke with another officer. He admitted that he had overreacted, that the security guard's perception had been mistaken, and that the woman had done nothing wrong. The manager's voice carried a mixture of apology and embarrassment. It was a small victory, but it didn't erase the tension she had felt or the unnecessary stress of being handcuffed and detained. Inside the room, the woman continued to answer questions, her demeanor unwavering. She explained that she understood the officer's perspective, that she knew their training and experience led them to act cautiously, but that assumptions without verification could cause harm. She used the moment to educate them gently about proper procedure, bias, and observation skills. She wanted to turn the incident into a learning opportunity, not a confrontation. The officers began to relax slightly, realizing that she was not a threat, and that the situation had escalated due to a simple misunderstanding. They asked more clarifying questions, listening carefully this time and taking her advice seriously. She could see that her calm, professional approach had shifted the dynamic. Instead of conflict, there was dialogue. Instead of suspicion, there was understanding. She thought about the broader implications of the situation. Even as a police commander, she was not immune to being judged unfairly. The incident highlighted how assumptions, biases, and quick judgments could lead to unnecessary escalation. She realized that many people, especially those who looked like her, might face similar experiences without the advantage of authority or experience. The thought saddened her, but it also reinforced her resolve to handle the situation with grace and intelligence. The officers eventually asked her to remove her handcuffs. She complied, stretching her wrists slightly and taking a deep breath. The tension in the room eased, replaced by a sense of relief and recognition. She had maintained control, protected her dignity, and clarified the misunderstanding without confrontation. The officers, now aware of her identity and experience, treated her with the respect she had earned. As she prepared to leave the station, she reflected on the morning's events. A simple shopping trip had turned into a complex test of patience, composure, and professionalism. She had faced assumptions, suspicion, and procedural mistakes, yet she had remained calm and focused. She had used her knowledge and experience to navigate the situation effectively, turning what could have been a humiliating incident into an opportunity for understanding and learning. Outside the station, she felt the cool air on her face and the warmth of the sun. Passers-by had gathered, some offering apologies, some recording the moment, and some simply observing. She smiled faintly, acknowledging the complexity of human perception and the importance of patience, calm, and clarity in tense situations. She knew that the story would be shared, that people would discuss what had happened, and that the lessons from this incident could reach far beyond her own experience. As she walked back to her car, she reflected on the importance of presence, composure, and professional conduct. She had been tested in a way she hadn't expected, but she had navigated the challenge with grace and intelligence. She knew that there would be more moments in life where assumptions and misunderstandings could arise, but she also knew that patience, clarity, and calmness were powerful tools to resolve conflict and educate others. The morning had begun as a normal day off, filled with routine errands and casual shopping. By the time she left the station, it had become a story of resilience, professionalism, and the quiet power of calm authority. She had faced suspicion and judgment, yet she had maintained her dignity, clarified the truth, and left a lasting impression on those who had witnessed the incident. Even as she drove away, she reflected on the lessons learned. Assumptions could be dangerous, but patience and professionalism could change perceptions. Misunderstandings could escalate, but clarity and composure could resolve them. The experience reminded her that every interaction, no matter how small, held the potential for learning, growth, and reflection. And she carried that understanding with her, ready to face the rest of the day with the same calm, measured presence that had guided her through the morning's unexpected challenge. The day outside had grown warmer, and the sunlight streamed through the windows of the police station, highlighting the stillness inside the small room. The woman sat upright, her hands resting on the table, her posture calm yet assertive. The two officers across from her were visibly uneasy, unsure how to proceed. She had already answered questions patiently and explained the events in the store clearly, yet the tension lingered. The officers were caught between procedure, pride, and disbelief. She decided it was time to reveal her identity more fully, but she did so carefully, choosing her words with precision. "I understand your concern," she began in a calm, steady voice. "But I need to clarify something. I am not just an ordinary shopper. I am an off-duty police commander. I have spent over 2 decades in law enforcement, training officers, managing departments, and handling situations similar to this." The words hung in the air for a moment. The officers blinked in surprise, clearly caught off guard. One of them leaned back slightly, as if trying to absorb what he had just heard. The other kept his eyes on her, searching for any hint that she might be exaggerating. But she met their gaze steadily, calm and composed, the authority in her voice unmistakable. She continued, "I am here today as a private citizen, yes, but I also have a deep understanding of police procedures, legal rights, and proper conduct. I want to resolve this misunderstanding, but it is important that we handle it correctly, professionally, and respectfully." For a few seconds there was silence in the room. The officers exchanged brief glances, the weight of the situation sinking in. They realized that they had been dealing with someone who not only had authority over them in rank, but also had more experience in handling difficult high-pressure situations. Their initial certainty, the confidence that came with assuming she was guilty, now seemed fragile. One of the officers finally spoke, his voice quieter than before. "We didn't know. We didn't realize who you were." He shifted uncomfortably, clearly feeling the embarrassment of the mistake. The other officer nodded, not trusting his own words to speak. The room was filled with tension, but it was a different kind of tension now, a mixture of surprise, shame, and curiosity. The woman remained composed, understanding that revealing her identity could provoke defensiveness or resentment. She kept her tone neutral, even as she addressed the misunderstanding. "I am not here to reprimand you," she said softly. "I am here to make sure that everyone involved understands what happened so this does not happen again. Misunderstandings like this can escalate quickly if not handled carefully." She took a small breath and leaned forward slightly, emphasizing her words without raising her voice. It's important to remember that assumptions based on appearances can be misleading. A calm, composed individual might be unfairly judged simply because of how they look, the way they dress, or the way they carry themselves. It's crucial to verify facts before acting, especially when it comes to someone's freedom and dignity. The officers listened, the weight of her experience and calm authority pressing in on them. They had been trained to follow procedure, yet they had allowed their assumptions to dictate their actions. The woman's words were measured but firm, exposing the flaw in their judgment without attacking them personally. It was a delicate balance, and she managed it perfectly. She then showed her badge and credentials, placing them carefully on the table. The officers leaned in, examining the identification. There was no doubt now this was a police commander, someone with years of experience and authority. Their eyes widened slightly, the realization of their mistake hitting them fully. One officer muttered almost under his breath, "I can't believe this. We had no idea." His voice carried embarrassment and awe. The woman nodded slightly, acknowledging the moment, but she did not gloat or show satisfaction. She understood the importance of dignity, both hers and theirs. This was not about revenge or proving a point. It was about correcting a misunderstanding and restoring respect. The tension in the room began to shift. The officers, now aware of her rank and experience, softened in their demeanor. Their body language changed from defensive to cautious, as if they were trying to find a way to make amends for their mistake. The woman maintained her calm, watching the subtle changes and preparing to guide the situation toward a positive resolution. She spoke again, her voice steady. "I understand that mistakes happen, and I know that you were only doing your job. But it is also important to acknowledge the impact that assumptions and errors can have on someone's life. Being handcuffed, questioned, and treated as guilty when innocent is a stressful, embarrassing, and disempowering experience." Her words carried weight. The officers nodded, silently acknowledging the truth of what she was saying. They realized that they had allowed the situation to escalate unnecessarily, and that the woman had handled it with far more professionalism than they had. It was a humbling moment, and it set the stage for a different kind of conversation, one about learning, growth, and accountability. The woman then asked them to reflect on their actions. Think about how this might have looked to others, to the public, to bystanders who witnessed the situation. How would it feel to be in my position, and what lessons can be learned to prevent this from happening again? Her tone was firm but not accusatory. She was guiding them to see beyond procedure and into the human impact of their actions. One officer sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're right," he admitted quietly. "We acted too quickly and let assumptions take over. We should have asked more questions, observed more carefully, and verified before taking action." The other officer nodded in agreement, his eyes meeting hers with a newfound respect. She smiled faintly, appreciating their honesty. "Acknowledging mistakes is the first step toward improvement," she said. "But it's also important to act on those lessons. Use this experience to inform your future decisions. Treat every interaction as an opportunity to practice patience, fairness, and respect." The conversation shifted gradually from tension to reflection. The woman discussed proper procedures, how to approach potential misunderstandings, and how to maintain professional composure under pressure. She shared examples from her career, illustrating how calm, careful observation often prevented minor issues from becoming major conflicts. The officers listened attentively, absorbing the guidance with quiet respect. Meanwhile, outside the room, other staff at the station and the store manager were becoming aware of the revelation. Whispers spread quickly as people realized that the woman in question was a police commander. Some expressed surprise, others admiration, and a few seemed embarrassed on behalf of the officers who had made the mistake. The story of the incident began to ripple quietly through the small circles of those present. Inside the room, the woman remained composed, focusing on guiding the officers rather than dwelling on her own frustration. She knew that embarrassment could make people defensive, so she maintained a tone of calm authority, balancing firmness with empathy. "I am sharing this because I want you to learn," she said. "Not to make you feel guilty or ashamed, but to ensure that future situations are handled better for everyone involved." The officers absorbed her words, nodding in understanding. They began to ask her questions about specific procedures, seeking guidance on how to avoid similar mistakes. She answered patiently, providing practical advice and sharing insights from her years in law enforcement. The atmosphere in the room shifted from confrontation to collaboration, a testament to her ability to handle the situation with grace. She also reminded them of the importance of perception and bias. "Sometimes unconscious assumptions influence our decisions more than facts do," she explained. "It's human, yes, but in law enforcement, it's our responsibility to recognize those moments and act carefully. Never let assumptions dictate actions that could affect someone's life, dignity, or freedom." The officers listened carefully, reflecting on the incident. They realized that the woman's calm demeanor, combined with her knowledge and authority, had allowed them to recognize their error without further conflict. She had turned a potentially humiliating and tense situation into a learning experience, demonstrating the power of professionalism and patience. After some time, the conversation reached a natural conclusion. The officers expressed sincere apologies, both for the mistake and for any discomfort or stress they had caused. The woman accepted the apologies graciously, reinforcing the importance of accountability and respect. She reminded them that mistakes happen, but how we respond to them defines our character and professionalism. She stood, preparing to leave the room. The officers rose as well, offering handshakes and respectful words. The tension that had filled the space earlier was gone, replaced by understanding and mutual respect. The woman's calm, measured approach had transformed the dynamic entirely, turning a stressful and potentially humiliating incident into a moment of reflection and growth. As she walked toward the exit, she took a deep breath and reflected on the morning's events. A simple shopping trip had escalated into a significant test of patience, authority, and composure. Yet she had handled it with dignity, clarity, and professionalism. She had used the experience to educate, correct, and guide, leaving a lasting impression on everyone involved. Outside, the sun shone warmly, and the city continued its bustling rhythm. People moved along the sidewalks, oblivious to the lessons learned inside the small room moments ago. She walked calmly, taking in the sights and sounds, grateful that she had maintained her composure and had turned a difficult situation into an opportunity for understanding and growth. She knew the story would not end here. The incident would be remembered, shared, and reflected upon, not just for the mistake itself, but for how it had been handled. It would serve as a reminder of the importance of patience, careful observation, and the power of calm authority in moments of misunderstanding. As she left the station and stepped into the afternoon sunlight, she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had turned what could have been a humiliating and frustrating situation into a meaningful lesson for others. Her professionalism, calm demeanor, and ability to educate through example had not only resolved the misunderstanding, but it also left a lasting impact on the officers involved. The day continued, and the incident would become a story of resilience, authority, and the quiet power of composure in the face of assumptions and misunderstanding. For the woman, it was another reminder that dignity, patience, and professionalism could turn even the most challenging moments into opportunities for growth and positive change. The tension in the police station had finally eased, replaced by a quieter, reflective atmosphere. The woman remained composed, her presence commanding yet calm. The officers who had initially detained her now treated her with a level of respect that had not been there before. They understood fully the gravity of their earlier mistake. What had begun as a simple misunderstanding in a store had transformed into a moment of learning, reflection, and accountability. The woman took a seat again at the small table, her posture upright, her hands resting on the surface. She understood that resolving the situation completely required more than just revealing her identity and accepting apologies. The officers needed guidance, they needed context, and they needed to process what had just happened. She spoke gently but firmly. "I know this was not intentional," she began. "Mistakes happen, and misunderstandings are part of human interactions. But how we respond afterward can define the outcome, and it can have lasting effects on everyone involved." The officers listened attentively. One of them, clearly still feeling the weight of embarrassment, leaned forward slightly. "We just didn't think," he started, then paused, unsure how to finish the thought. He glanced at his partner, who nodded in silent agreement. The woman smiled faintly, sensing that this was an opportunity to help them understand the broader implications of their actions without making them defensive. "Let me explain something important," she continued. "Every time we assume something about a person, every time we act based on perception rather than fact, we risk harming them. It might not be intentional, but the consequences can be serious. A simple assumption can lead to fear, stress, humiliation, or even danger. And that is why we need to be careful, even in situations that seem minor or routine." The officers nodded, clearly reflecting on the point. The woman could see that her words were sinking in. She had spent decades training officers to understand this exact principle, the importance of patience, observation, and fairness. Now, in a real-life example, she was applying it with the people in front of her, turning theory into tangible understanding. She then addressed the store staff who had gathered nearby. The manager stepped forward, a mixture of apology and concern on his face. "I'm very sorry for the misunderstanding," he said quietly. "I didn't mean for things to escalate. It was an honest mistake." The woman nodded. "I understand," she replied calmly. "But it's important to recognize that mistakes like this can affect someone's life and dignity. Everyone involved must be mindful, observant, and careful to avoid unnecessary conflict." The conversation shifted to reflection and education. The woman explained that her goal was not to blame anyone, but to ensure that lessons were learned. "This can be a positive experience if we all take something from it," she said. "It's a chance to improve communication, to practice patience, and to understand how assumptions can mislead even the most trained professionals." The officers asked her questions, this time with curiosity rather than suspicion. They wanted to know how to handle similar situations better, how to verify information without making assumptions, and how to maintain professionalism under pressure. She answered thoughtfully, offering practical advice that drew from her years of experience. She explained how small details, body language, tone of voice, and careful observation could make a difference in understanding a situation correctly. The dialogue continued for some time, with the woman gently guiding the officers through examples of proper conduct. She emphasized the importance of empathy, noting that understanding how a person might feel when wrongly accused could prevent future conflicts. She shared stories from her own career, where calm observation and patience had prevented escalation, highlighting that policing was as much about human connection as it was about enforcing rules. Outside the room, the incident had begun to draw attention. A few bystanders who had witnessed the arrest were talking quietly among themselves. Some expressed surprise that the woman was a police commander, others admiration for the way she had handled herself. A sense of respect began to circulate quietly, a recognition of professionalism, composure, and dignity in a situation that had initially seemed tense and unfair. Inside, the woman addressed the officers once more. "It's also important to recognize how this situation could have appeared to the public," she said. "People watching don't see the full story. They see what's happening in front of them, and they form judgments quickly. That's why it's critical to act responsibly, fairly, and with transparency whenever possible." Her words resonated. The officers began discussing among themselves how they could handle similar incidents better in the future, brainstorming ways to communicate more effectively, observe more carefully, and ensure that assumptions did not dictate their actions. The woman listened, offering guidance only when necessary, allowing them to arrive at their own understanding while reinforcing the lessons with her presence and authority. The store manager approached again, this time offering a more heartfelt apology. "I see now that we overreacted," he said. "I hope you can accept that it was never our intention to cause harm." She nodded. "I accept the apology," she replied. "But it's important to remember this experience so that it doesn't happen again. Awareness and reflection can prevent misunderstandings in the future." The woman's focus throughout the conversation remained on teaching and reflection rather than punishment. She understood that mistakes happen, that human perception can be flawed, and that what mattered most was how people responded afterward. By turning a tense, potentially humiliating situation into a teaching moment, she ensured that the experience would leave a lasting positive impact. She noticed the officer's demeanor shift again, from embarrassment to thoughtful engagement. They were asking questions not to justify their actions but to understand how to improve. They were listening rather than defending, reflecting rather than reacting. It was a transformation that demonstrated the power of calm authority, patience, and constructive guidance. At one point, she paused and addressed everyone in the room. "Remember, this is not just about today. It's about the way we approach people, the way we observe, and the way we act. Every interaction matters. A simple act of misunderstanding can affect someone deeply, but it can also become an opportunity for learning and improvement if handled correctly." Her words seemed to resonate deeply. The officers nodded, the store staff listened carefully, and even those observing quietly from outside the room felt the weight of the message. It was a reminder that human interactions are delicate, and that professionalism, empathy, and reflection can turn mistakes into lessons. After some time, the discussion began to wind down. The woman stood, signaling that the formal part of the conversation was over. She had achieved what she came to do: clarify the misunderstanding, accept apologies, guide the officers toward reflection, and ensure that everyone left with a clearer understanding of how to handle similar situations in the future. The officers offered handshakes again, this time with genuine respect and gratitude. The woman returned the gesture, maintaining her calm and composed demeanor. She had not raised her voice, not demanded recognition, and not sought revenge. She had simply used patience, authority, and intelligence to turn a difficult situation into a learning moment. As she prepared to leave the station, she reflected quietly on the events of the day. What had begun as a routine shopping trip had evolved into a complex situation involving misunderstanding, assumption, and judgment. Yet she had navigated it with grace, clarity, and professionalism. She had turned a moment of stress and tension into a lasting lesson in respect, observation, and patience. Outside, the city continued its rhythm. Cars moved along busy streets. Pedestrians carried on with their errands, and the sunlight fell warmly on the sidewalks. She stepped into the fresh air, feeling a sense of calm satisfaction. The situation had been handled, lessons had been learned, and understanding had been achieved. She had demonstrated the power of composure, intelligence, and professionalism even in the face of unfair treatment. She walked slowly through the streets, reflecting on the broader lessons of the day. Mistakes happen. Assumptions are common. Human perception can be flawed, but through patience, calm, and careful guidance, misunderstandings can be transformed into moments of learning and growth. She felt grateful that she had remained composed, that she had spoken with clarity and authority, and that she had helped others see the situation from a broader perspective. Even as she walked away from the police station, she knew that the story of the incident would not be forgotten. The officers would carry the lesson forward. The store staff would remember the importance of careful observation, and anyone who heard about the incident would see an example of how patience, professionalism, and calm authority can transform even the most stressful situations into opportunities for understanding and growth. The woman continued her day with a sense of quiet reflection. She knew that challenges like this would arise again in life, but she also knew that maintaining dignity, clarity, and calmness could turn any situation into a chance for learning and positive change. The morning's events had tested her patience and professionalism, but they had also reaffirmed her belief in the power of composure, empathy, and education. As she moved through the city, she noticed small details, the way people walked, the expressions on faces, the subtle rhythms of daily life. She reflected on how easily assumptions could shape interactions and how important it was to remain calm, observe carefully, and act thoughtfully. The lessons of the morning would remain with her, guiding her not just as a police commander, but as a person navigating the complexities of human behavior and interaction. By the time she reached the end of her errands, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The misunderstanding had been resolved, the lessons had been shared, and respect had been restored. She knew that the impact of the morning's events would extend far beyond her own experience, reaching those involved directly and indirectly, and leaving a mark of professionalism, authority, and human understanding. The day had begun with an ordinary shopping trip, and it had evolved into a powerful story of patience, calm, and reflection. She had faced judgment and assumption, yet she had responded with intelligence, dignity, and grace. The officers had learned, the store staff had learned, and the woman herself had reaffirmed the principles that guided her life and career: patience, professionalism, and the quiet power of calm authority. And as she finally returned home, the afternoon sun casting long shadows along the streets, she felt a sense of peace. The misunderstanding was resolved, respect was restored, and lessons had been learned. It had been a day filled with unexpected challenges, but through patience, intelligence, and professionalism, it had become a moment of growth, reflection, and lasting impact. The rest of the afternoon felt unusually quiet as the woman left the police station and returned to the streets. The tension that had filled her morning had lifted, leaving behind a sense of calm reflection. She walked slowly, taking in the sights and sounds around her, thinking about how quickly an ordinary day could turn into a life lesson for everyone involved. It was remarkable, she thought, how one small misunderstanding could grow so large, yet still be turned into an opportunity for learning and growth. As she moved through the city, she noticed the way people interacted with one another. There were small gestures, subtle expressions, moments of kindness, and fleeting signs of impatience. All of it reminded her that human behavior is complex and unpredictable. Just as the officers had misjudged her actions earlier in the day, she realized, countless misunderstandings happen every day, often without resolution. Today had been a rare opportunity to correct one before it spiraled out of control. She reflected on the officers' reactions after she revealed her identity. At first, there had been disbelief, followed by embarrassment and then respect. That sequence of emotions fascinated her. It reminded her that people often react based on what they think they know. But when presented with new information, even the most confident assumptions can crumble. It was a lesson not just for the officers, but for everyone who had witnessed or would hear about the incident. The woman knew that her calm demeanor had played a key role in diffusing the situation. At no point had she raised her voice, become defensive, or tried to assert dominance through force. Instead, she had relied on patience, clarity, and professionalism. She had guided the officers and the store staff to see the situation from a different perspective, turning a tense confrontation into a constructive conversation. It was a testament to the power of self-control and measured action. As she continued walking, she thought about the bystanders who had watched the events unfold. Some had recorded the arrest on their phones, others had whispered among themselves, and a few had expressed silent concern. She knew that these people would carry their own interpretations of the incident. Some might see it as an example of injustice, others as a moment of authority and professionalism. Either way, she realized that her actions had left a mark on them, showing that composure and dignity could change how a situation is perceived by those watching. She also thought about the store staff. The manager had apologized sincerely, acknowledging that his initial reaction had been influenced by assumptions and a lack of information. The woman had accepted the apology, emphasizing the importance of learning from the mistake rather than dwelling on it. She hoped that the staff would remember this experience, that it would guide their actions in the future, and that they would treat customers with more patience and understanding. Her reflection turned to the officers. They had initially acted according to what they thought was procedure, yet they had allowed assumptions and biases to influence their judgment. Through calm explanation and professional authority, she had helped them recognize their errors and consider better ways to handle similar situations in the future. It was clear to her that this incident would stay with them, shaping their actions and decisions in ways that could prevent harm to others. As she walked toward her car, parked a few blocks away, she thought about the broader lessons of the day. Misunderstandings can happen to anyone, regardless of experience or authority. Assumptions can escalate conflicts and create stress for all parties involved. But patience, clear communication, and calm reasoning can resolve even the most difficult situations. The morning's events had reinforced these truths in a very personal and powerful way. She settled into her car, letting out a quiet breath as she started the engine. Driving slowly through the familiar streets, she reflected on the emotional journey of the morning. There had been disbelief, frustration, embarrassment, and tension, followed by realization, understanding, and resolution. Each stage had taught her something, not just about others, but about herself. She had confirmed, once again, the importance of maintaining composure under pressure and using experience and knowledge to guide outcomes constructively. Her mind turned to the people she might influence beyond the officers and store staff. The story of her experience could serve as a lesson for anyone. The importance of judging situations based on facts rather than assumptions, the need for patience when handling difficult interactions, and the power of remaining calm and professional, even when treated unfairly. She knew that sharing the story carefully could inspire reflection, awareness, and change in others. She also considered the role of race in the misunderstanding. As a Black woman, she was acutely aware of how quickly assumptions could be made about her intentions and behavior. Today had highlighted that reality, but it had also shown that professionalism, composure, and clear communication could counteract bias and correct misconceptions. It was a reminder that dignity and calmness were not just personal strengths. They were tools for navigating a world that often judged unfairly. Her thoughts drifted to the future. She knew that incidents like this could happen again, either to her or to someone else, but she felt confident that with patience, professionalism, and clear communication, such situations could be handled without unnecessary escalation. The lessons she had reinforced today would guide her in future interactions, and she hoped they would guide others as well. By the time she arrived home, the afternoon sun was beginning to dip, casting a golden light across the streets. She parked her car and stepped out, feeling a sense of closure. The day had been challenging, unexpected, and intense, yet it had also been enlightening. She had faced an unfair situation, navigated it with composure, and turned it into an opportunity for learning. It was a reminder that even difficult experiences could yield valuable lessons if approached thoughtfully. Inside her home, she sat quietly, reflecting further on the morning's events. She thought about how she had remained calm despite being handcuffed and treated as a suspect. She considered the choices she had made, the words she had used, and the way she had guided the officers and store staff toward understanding. Each decision had contributed to the resolution, showing the importance of thoughtful action in high-pressure situations. She realized that what she had done today went beyond correcting a misunderstanding. She had demonstrated leadership, patience, and the power of calm authority. She had shown that even when faced with unfair treatment, it was possible to maintain dignity and effect positive change. Her actions had left an impact on those directly involved and on anyone who would hear the story in the future. Her reflection also included a sense of empathy. She understood why the officers had acted as they did. They had been following their training, reacting to what they perceived as suspicious behavior. Their mistake was not malicious, it was human. By responding with patience, clarity, and professionalism, she had transformed a potentially harmful situation into a moment of growth for everyone. She thought about the lessons she wanted others to take from this story. First, that assumptions can be dangerous, especially when they are acted upon without verification. Second, that maintaining calm and composure in the face of unfair treatment can change the outcome. Third, that teaching through example is often more effective than confrontation. And fourth, that empathy, clarity, and professionalism are powerful tools in resolving misunderstandings. Her mind also returned to the public perception of the incident. She knew that some people had witnessed the arrest while others might hear about it later. In every case, the story could serve as a reminder of the importance of patience, observation, and fair treatment. She hoped that her calm and professional approach would encourage others to reflect on how they handle misunderstandings and assumptions in their own lives. The woman spent the rest of the day in quiet reflection, considering the impact of her actions on others. She thought about the officers, the store staff, and even the bystanders who had watched the events unfold. Each had learned something, whether consciously or subconsciously, about fairness, patience, and the consequences of assumptions. The incident would likely stay with them, influencing their future interactions in ways that could prevent similar misunderstandings. She also reflected on her own growth. Even with years of experience in law enforcement, this morning had reminded her of the importance of patience, empathy, and calm authority. It had reinforced her belief that professionalism is not just about enforcing rules, but about guiding others, teaching, and creating understanding in moments of tension. As evening approached, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The misunderstanding had been resolved, respect had been restored, and lessons had been learned. The morning had tested her patience and composure, yet she had navigated it successfully. She had turned a stressful and potentially humiliating experience into a positive, educational, and reflective moment for everyone involved. Finally, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had faced an unexpected challenge, maintained her dignity, and left a lasting impact on those around her. The day had been a reminder that even ordinary moments could become extraordinary opportunities for learning, growth, and reflection. Her calm, professional, and human-centered approach had made all the difference. As the sun set, she looked out the window, watching the city bathed in the soft glow of evening light. She knew that life would continue, full of challenges and unexpected events, but she felt confident that with patience, composure, and professionalism, she could navigate whatever came her way. The morning's events would remain with her, a reminder of the quiet power of dignity, calm authority, and thoughtful action in transforming misunderstandings into meaningful lessons. And with that thought, she prepared to rest, carrying with her the knowledge that even in the face of unfair treatment, assumptions, and misunderstanding, it was possible to act with grace, educate others, and leave a lasting positive impact.